The year was 1996. A DOS game comes out in the Windows 95 era, and it's FMV, and it's something special. Synnergist tells the story of our protagonist, Tim Machin, a reporter at a shitty tabloid that needs to write 2 articles or he's fired.
Yeah, but
He gets dragged into the mystery of a huge citywide conspiracy to eliminate all the perceived wastes of potential, your middle and lower classes, under the guidance of one pretentious prick called Victor Ambrose.
wait. You mean I get to interview Mr. Ambrose? The Victor Ambrose?
I think it's a very interesting story, and one that definitely needs more of an in-depth video to talk about the themes and the general narrative analysis, but that's for another time. No, the thing I really kind of want to talk about is the story behind the game, and its most infamous thing, the Easter egg path. So I've already mentioned that this game comes out after Windows 95 is a thing for DOS, which doesn't really make it popular, nor does the fact that it only comes out in Europe, even though the developers are American. 1. Vicarious Visions. Yes, that Vicarious Visions. Also that Vicarious Visions. Yes, that Vicarious Visions. This was their first game and only adventure game, and only one of a handful PC games that they made. Now, the thing that I've always found extremely interesting about Synnergist is that they were in high school when they started making this, and they got financial backing while in high school, and they carried it all the way over to when they started university. There's indie developers, and then there's 90s indie developers with money. I've kind of always been intrigued and wanting to know what the story behind that is, and I'm gonna tell you, we're gonna find out. But first, we kind of have to go on a little bit of a journey. Now, one of the things that is very well known about this obscure game is that there's an Easter egg path that has never been found. There are multiple forum posts going along the lines of, help me discover the secrets of Synnergist. It's been 13 years, it's been 17 years, it's been 20 years. And they're not wrong until, a couple months ago when a very plucky girl and some of her friends decided to hunker down and break that shit apart. Yeah, I'm talking about me. When I first came across the game a couple of years ago, I tried to find it naturally, played it as many different ways as I thought I could do, and I never found the path. Nothing happened. Last year? No, actually it was 2019 when I was playing it for the YouTube Adventure Roundtable for our FMV club, when we finished the game and I was talking about the hidden Easter egg path, and we kind of just struck a chord of being like, let's try and work this out. We can work it out. We've got several minds. We've got game developers amongst us. We've got people that have studied, narrative design, and, some of us are programmers. Let's try and work this out. And in my insane view, I went, you know what? I'm going to work on extracting all the videos and extracting all the audio and extracting as much as I can up to a point, because there's only so much that me, as someone who's a self-taught programmer, can really take myself. And I spent weeks, re-encoding videos and re-encoding speech, and I basically sent myself insane. But I found them sprinkled amongst the other characters of the game. These videos of Karthik Bala, the main writer of the game, and this hooded stranger who, according to the credits, is called Raymond Luxury Yacht, which of course is a Monty Python reference. Unfortunately, these videos didn't really give me much of a hint. Karthik's videos were half of an interview where I kind of didn't know what was going on. I couldn't work out which order any of these things came in, and I couldn't understand what was going on because I couldn't see what Tim was actually saying to him, because the way the game is made. Tim talks in cutscenes but is entirely silent in the game. It's a weird choice. One, again, we can talk about in some sort of mechanics video, but because of this, I had no clue about how to trigger that. The Hooded Strangers, I knew where some of his lines happened because I could see in the background it was Heisenberg Park, which is a pretty big location of the game, but I had no idea how to trigger him there. Now, one of the forum posts that is up there, I think it's on Vogons, which is the main forum I kind of insinuated myself in as Cindy. But basically, someone had found that you could trigger the hooded stranger in one scene if you did a certain thing, which is what happens. But again, he talks in such a way that he doesn't really give you any clue about what the next step is with him. And because of that, we couldn't even work out if that came first or if that came second. So it was kind of one of those things that we kind of had to turn a different direction, which is when I started going through the narration lines, which, oh boy, there is a lot of narration and so beautifully written for high schoolers. And I don't mean to make that sound like a dig at them, but I really think that their high school teacher, like their English teacher, would be really proud of them. There are words in here like adroitly, words that don't really get used in the common parlance, but I think it's beautiful that they're here, and it makes the game somewhat more special in a way. And basically this took me another fortnight of running through and reconverting uncompressed clips into something that I could actually listen to. And that's when I came across, after, several hundred lines, I came across two very interesting lines. One is for the security room, which suggests that the wall has been graffitied with the words, "The avalanche has already begun." And the other suggests that you can go into the sewers outside of the morgue. And knowing what I know now, after what we've done, these are red herrings. This doesn't show up at all. A lot of the forums get very hung up about the security room because it seems to have a lot of narration and a lot of hotspots that suggest that maybe you can break through this floor, or maybe you can climb something or go into a vent. There are a lot of hotspots and they're all red herrings. They're like the narration that says the avalanche has already begun, there is no graphic that matches this in the game at all. I couldn't find it. We extracted as much as we could and it's nowhere. But oh my god, I would love to see that. That would make that my wallpaper on my desktop forever. But yeah, so I was so obsessed with this idea that the security room was where everything was. And again, everyone was, because it's right near the end of the game. And it's kind of like, if you're going to do a hidden Easter egg path that winds its way through the game, you'd think you would leave it right at the end. And that's kind of where I'd hit the wall. I'd gone through everything that I could get at that point. And, we'd had like a cursory look at the people behind the game at that point. Like, we knew that both the Bala brothers had, gone on to make Vicarious Visions, this big company, and then had moved on to another company. And we knew that Joseph McElroy, who plays Joe TV, was a programmer on the game and did some additional writing. And when we looked him up, he was still a programmer of sorts. He had actually released a mini golf 3D app on Android Market. I've played it, it's alright. It doesn't have a story behind it, but that's kind of what he was up to. Rishi Bashu, or I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but he played Victor Ambrose in the game, the main villain. He's still an actor today. Actually, funnily enough, one of my friends is friends of a friend with him, so we Victor Ambrose has not aged at all. He looks exactly the same. It's amazing. Jeff Baskins, who plays Tim Matchin, he is now a weather presenter. Possibly a bad one, according to an article that we had read. But, still working, so I think it was just a blip that year. The other main programmer on the game that we believed most likely had invented this path, Aaron Marsh, at first he seemed to have disappeared, and then, a little, light snooping and all that, kind of, we found that he was actually now a rabbi, and I kind of didn't want to bother the rabbi. I kind of just, was just like, I can work it out. This man is clearly, moved on from being, involved in any sort of game things, and he probably doesn't want someone to come back and say, hey, do you remember this thing that you programmed? It was weird. Or, I'm still trying to work it out. Can you tell me what it is? And I was kind of disheartened by that point because, this was like 6 months into me really trying hard to work this out. And I kind of just continually said, maybe it's time to email the rabbi. But I really wanted it to be something that, that I had done, or that, that we as a group had worked out. And, we didn't end up finding it naturally, which is kind of not a sad point, but, it would have been much more impressive to have found it naturally. But considering how absolutely baffling this path is, there is absolutely no way that I would believe that anyone had worked this out by themselves. And then the pandemic started. And while at that point it wasn't really affecting me here in Australia, my American friends, Pickle Dog and Wilco Webb and Kigurami, they were at home a lot more often and they kind of wanted something to work on. And at that point I was like, look, I've gotten as far as I can with these videos and these audio lines, but I can't extract the files of the game and we kind of need to push this further. And so they started working on how to extract that. And I started the insane task of mapping out the save game files. Now, if you haven't looked at the save game files, they're these really huge columns of numbers that basically hold information, but it's not like a straightforward, like this thing is this and that thing is that. It's kind of an absolutely insane jumble of numbers and words and letters, just trying to tell the game what's happening at any given moment. So basically, I then started the game, got a copy of the save game straight away, did a move, and saved again, and did that for every single action for the first act. And through doing that, I worked out where the inventory is in the save file, and a couple little things like where the basic sections where the variables are. Now, okay, if you don't know much about programming, variables are just kind of like information, data points, that say this thing is this thing at this time. Some of them might be words, some of them might be numbers. This is all encrypted, so they're just numbers. But so I basically knew that the room variables were here, the global variables were here, the inventory was at the bottom, and the top was kind of like where Tim was on the screen. Which screen is Tim on? And I knew the room numbers because of all that cataloging of all the videos of characters and sound audio. So I started saving my game and altering it to move to other locations. And for the most part, this worked. Where it didn't work was all the scenes that we worked out were involved with the hidden path. And again, the reason I knew that this wasn't working, my first instance was just kind of like, oh my god, you can't actually even do this, it's just going to crash. And then I realized that the main problem actually is that I'm failing a variable check, which is basically to say that I'm there legitimately. It's almost like they safeguarded the game against trying to push your way into this scene. So we just kind of then, all the save game insanity was mostly me just trying anything. I gave myself a perfect inventory, which again, my friend Wilco Webb helped me work out what the numbers were and how that worked. I took myself to that security room that we were all obsessed with because I was like, I have all the missing objects. Let's see what I can do. And then nothing happened. Nothing worked on anything. And it was such a disappointment. But it was kind of helpful because it was kind of like, there is nothing in this room that can work unless there's a variable check that I'm somehow failing. There's nothing in this room. And about this point, because this is the end of May, we're about a week or two away from actually extracting the files and then working everything out. And one of the forum posts, the RPG Codex one, the one that I ended up joining on as Cindy, someone suddenly goes, I worked out how to get the broken watch. I don't know how I got the broken watch, but I've got the broken watch, which is pretty much the point that I went, I am making an account and I'm going to respond to this person. I don't do forums, so, which is why I'm not on there as Ryzolka. I was like, I'm literally going on here to talk about Synnergist. I'm being a Synnergist. I'm being Cindy. Okay. So, I questioned him to try and work out, like exactly what it was that he might have done that would unlock this. And, which is the point that we realized that he was going back to the Last Chance Bar, which is a location that you'd just been to in the previous act, straight after going to the new location where the cutscene had just happened. So he was going... So from a narrative point of view, this makes no sense. Basically, Tim gets beaten up at the Last Chance Bar and is moved to Jessica's apartment. What he was doing was going straight back to the Last Chance Bar and clicking on a hotspot that didn't work in the previous scene. It only works at this time. A pinball machine. And basically, it has a randomized message on it. So you have to click on it sometimes a couple of times. Sometimes you get it first time round. But there's a message that goes, I got the multi-ball. I love the multi-ball. I even managed to stop the clock. And the moment stop the clock happens, that watch is now available. And so part of the mystery had been solved, and not by me. And I kind of, not quite panicked, but I was just kind of like, look, we're getting so close. I just need to get over. I just need to get into those files and work it out. It just kind of made me feel like, someone else is working on this, and I've been working on this pretty much 9 months at that point. I'm not really gonna let this go easily. And we finally got in to the scripts. So anyone who's attempted to break into this game before will mention that this game is encrypted. It has its own operating system and wrapper to basically load the graphics, the music, the audio, and the FMV technology that this game runs on, because it's not natively supported by DOS. And one of the few things that actually is extremely accessible to reach is a list of inventory items, which is actually how we knew that there were 3 things missing. And I mean, we've just spoken about the broken watch, but there's also a grappling hook and a rope. There's also another list that's unexpected. So this unexpected list is actually a list of locations and characters from the game Martian Memorandum, the Tex Murphy game by Access. I mean, it's no hard feat to find out that the engine is the Access engine, the same one that Neutropolis uses, but it's just kind of weird that this list of locations is just here. But it did kind of help us work out where in the Access, history of Access, it was actually placed, that it was just after Martian Memorandum and not before any of the other systems, like the Amazon one, or even Under a Killing Moon. Kigurumi and Wilco Webb attempted to use an extract tool that had been made for Under a Killing Moon, but it didn't work. I mean, we did manage to get out some of the MIDI files, but it didn't really help us get to the scripts. And because we knew where this was placed in the timeline of things, ScumVM has tools for Martian Memorandum, and you can if you know some programming, to readjust it from that into Synnergist, which is what Wilco Webb did, and Kigurumi helped him at the last little bit as well. And we were into the scripts. And between all the notes I had taken in terms of like the save game files, what the room numbers are, what the room numbers are for, in terms of what I'm expecting in what location, and like the variables I had worked out, We then started piecing together the path by basically going to the end and then working our way back through the code. And I mean, I could go into huge amounts of detail about like, oh, we did this and we did that and we did, but you know what? Let's actually just talk about the path itself, because in talking about the path itself, you can imagine how much like hopping we did in terms of trying to work stuff out. Step 1 is obtaining the grappling hook. Straight after meeting Jessica's pimp in Act 2, you go to Tim's apartment. So much like Jedi 23 had found that if he went straight to the Last Chance bar and played the pinball machine, he could go back and find the broken watch. It's actually kind of better to go to Tim's apartment. Basically, his keys were stolen during the ending of Act 1 going into Act 2. So you actually kind of need to go back to the office because that's where he has a spare pair of keys, and then go to Tim's apartment. But anyway, you go to Tim's apartment. I mean, you have to get that key anyway as part of the overall plot, so that's no real spoiler. But in Tim's apartment, and what a beautiful apartment it is, he has this picture of a penny farthing, and you have to click on this exactly 6 times. Now, if you click on this 7 times, you're effed. There is no way through this. It is literally 6 clicks and you're done. If you do a 7th, it's gone. Now, if you do these 6 clicks, the hooded stranger appears in Heisenberg Park as if he already knows Tim and gives him the grappling hook and keeps looking at his watch. So step 2, the broken watch. As we've mentioned, you go to the Last Chance bar. You click on the pinball machine until it says, I love the multi-ball. I even managed to stop the clock. And then you head back to Jessica's apartment and pick up the watch. Now, step 3 is where it gets interesting. So there's actually multiple paths through this game. If you go through the easier path, or like the path that you're more likely to have picked up along the way. I mean, technically you can do it both ways, but you can pick up a beeper from Tim's apartment. And so later on in the game, you're supposed to be having a date with Jessica, and instead of her leaving a message on your phone at the office, she sends you a beeper message, and you tend to go straight there and she doesn't die. But if you don't have the beeper, you then run out of tokens for the subway, and you then are late for the date. You can also be late for the date other ways, but it's harder to trigger if you've got the beeper. Anyway, so if you're late for the date, Jessica unfortunately has been murdered. Now, instead of checking out the body, as you naturally would if your girlfriend had just been murdered, you head down from that scene. The hooded stranger is there, and he doesn't know who Tim is, and he wants a broken watch. Or rather, he's hoping for a broken watch. He doesn't say he wants a broken watch, but, the things he said kind of gives you the indication he wants a broken watch. Anyway, so technically, from that point of view, the hooded stranger is going through time. He uses the broken watch to go back to your first meeting. It's all very meta. But anyway, you give him the broken watch, and he doesn't actually give you anything. But then you can now go up to Jessica's body, check it out, everything goes ahead like it should. Mwah, beautiful. You can move on to the next step. Now, the thing is, if you haven't done that, if you haven't given him the broken watch, he never goes back in time to give you that grappling hook. And so that grappling hook disappears if you haven't given him that broken watch. And you're screwed. So we're in step 3, which is the rope. So the rope is in Noxitech. What you actually need to do is go to the Chronicle, click on this shadow until Tim suddenly says, the shadows appear to move. And now the next time you go to Noxitech, the rope is available to pick up. I know, we're so close, but so far. So the next step is then to go to the morgue, which at this point of the narrative, you have no reason to go there. The morgue is done. There is nothing left here. Except if you've got the grappling hook and the rope. You can swing that rope, you can get upstairs, and you can enter into the second floor of the the morgue, which is a place that you never go in the game at all. Interestingly enough, in the programming of this section, there is actually a message that pops up that says, well, it's in the programming, it pops up, it says congratulations. It doesn't actually trigger in the game. So there's a congratulations message happening and you never see it. But you're actually not done. And that might be the reason why that congratulations message is gone. At this point, you just be kind of like, well, I've got myself this far. I just go around, click on the doors, and I will, find my way inside, and Karthik will be there. Which, again, based on the things that he says in the video, ooh, you'd think it'd be so easy. But no, all the doors are locked. All of them. So you actually have to walk around and try every single door in a particular order and for it to actually unlock. And I had to literally watch a hex editor, like as I said, do a move, save, do a move, save, to actually work out which order this comes in. So you have to go down to the first level of the morgue, click on the middle doors, click on the right doors, click on the left doors. Then you go up to the second floor, click on the middle doors, click on the right doors. Then you go to the 7th floor and click on the middle doors. And then you head all the way down to the lobby and then click on the elevator doors. And now the door on the 7th floor is open. So you have to walk all your way back up, go in there, use the control panel, which was not a hotspot the last time you were in this room, and Karthik pops out. My God, Aaron Marsh, you are an insane genius, and I love it. I'm all for this, but it's too hard to find. You need to put some, hints or something in here. If you've found the spot, it kind of gives you a little bit of an indication, the tiniest indication, but not really. The broken watch with the multi-ball message is the closest you really get. And I suppose, the hooded stranger saying, I wonder what time it is. But, that is the secret path. And that's how we came to the end of the game. Or we came to the end of the game. How we got to the path. It took us a year and a month exactly. To the day. Of a concerted effort of going through every single video. Reconverting them. Audio lines, reconverting those as well, or rather re-encoding them, and then hitting my head against a wall until we finally cracked the script files, the encryption. I don't know if I can honestly say that anyone would have worked that out naturally. And so where did we go from there? Well, I don't know if I've actually ended up mentioning this with doing all the edits of this video, but my friend Francisco Gonzalez, who is a game developer, knows someone who works with Karthik, and so we actually then went to him and said, hey, can we get Karthik's email address? We have something to show him, or rather I said that, because again, it is a team effort, but I'm definitely taking project manager points here because I lived with it daily for so long. Anyway, so I went to him and said, we found the path. This is the path. He was really surprised that anyone was even mentioning it, let alone found the path. And so the path actually had a prize involved. And it was a signed copy of the design Bible. And Karthik's not actually 100... Well, we think it might be there. It's one of those things that when he looked at his things, he didn't have anything that was a book that was just this is the design Bible. But he seems to have a lot of notes from it. He does want to actually donate that to Games Museum that's in New York. But he was talking about scanning that for me, a copy of that for me, because as you can see, I have gone through the game's code, in terms of all that. I am quite interested in what was cut, because there was a lot more in the design document that never made it into the game, and like, you know, just seeing the narrative reasons of like how things were decided and all that. That's the sort of stuff that I really find interesting. So it's been a couple of months, it hasn't happened yet, but you know, the pandemic's been weird. I haven't pushed for it or anything. However, he did also say he was gonna give me a signed copy of the game because he still has a couple of boxes, so I'm looking forward to that if that happens. If it doesn't happen, you know, like, I have some of the secrets, and more importantly, I got to sit down with him for like 2.5 hours where we talked about, you know, how the game came about, and you know, like some design choices, some of the things that I had discovered, you know, that sort of stuff. And I'm going to be posting, I'm not going to say like the whole raw thing, just because we did also then talk about other adventure games and got off topic on things, but anything to do with like the actual talking about Synnergist, I'm going to be doing a video by itself. But the one thing I'm going to actually put here in this video right now that we're going to be saying goodbye, because I don't have anything else to say right at this moment, is basically how the game came about, because that is the biggest story, I think, out of all of this. You know, yes, a path was found. A lot of work was done to find that path, but it all began many, many years ago in 1991. So that's much more of an interesting story than, hey, a couple of people across the world kind of got together and cracked a game open from the 90s. So yeah, I'm gonna leave you there. I'm probably gonna be doing some, you know, other videos on this, you know, shorter videos, because I'm sorry, this has probably been a very rambling mess, but I think it's kind of worthwhile to know that this game could not have been solved in any other way, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm going to do some other videos in terms of like, let's look at the save game map, let's look at some of the narrative choices, you know, that sort of thing. The interesting things for me anyway, that probably the most of you aren't interested in. So yeah, I'm now going to leave you with the very lovely Karthik Bala. In terms of when this interview happened, it was July 2020. And now we're in 2021. Pandemic's weird, man. You know, I thought I was gonna get, you know, not laid off, but you know, like furloughed, you know, like furloughed. That's the word I was after. So I was like, I'm gonna have all this time to edit. Didn't happen. Instead, my work decided to give me more work. Great in terms of surviving the pandemic. Not so great for making this video. Anyway, so yeah, I'm gonna leave you now with Karthik Bala. Such as the game that you started with.
Where do you want to start?
All right. Well, I've written up a whole list of questions, but like a big chunk of it is mostly about how it actually happened, because like you guys were in high school when you started it. So did it just start with like you and your brother, and then you started pulling in people like Aaron and Joe?
Yeah. So it needs to wind the clock back a little bit. So you know, my brother and I moved to the United States in 1989, and actually that's when we got our first computer, and we lived in Florida for about 1.5 years, and we moved to Rochester, New York, summer of 1990, and so didn't have friends or until we started school that fall, and actually a game that I picked up that summer of 1990 was Mean Streets, and totally fell in love with it. You know, VGA graphics, pretty stunning.
The hobo vampire appeal really went for you, because he gets around like a bit of a hobo vampire. I love that part of that game.
Totally. I mean, Mean Streets was it was pretty amazing, and so really got into, I think that's about the time I really got into PC games, and, you know, adventure games I think were my first love. And so played that, and actually that inspired me to want to start, hey, you'd love to make a game. had no idea where to start. Internet was in its infancy, and it wasn't until I got to college that I had access to the internet anyway. So there wasn't a lot of information out there. And so here's the funny, windy story about the whole thing. So the so one of the special things about Mean Streets, other than the graphics, it had this thing called Real Sound, which was playing back digital audio on a PC speaker without a sound card. And except my PC didn't have like a traditional PC speaker. It had this piezo crystal thing, and it would be barely audible, and but it was still pretty cool. And an ad lib had come out maybe around that time, and I was looking around for a sound card. And my brother and I, we didn't have much money, and we scrounged around parts, looking in newspapers to kind of build our PC. And so I was looking around for a sound card, but sound cards were really new back then. And so I was looking in the paper for parts, and I called up a guy, and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for a sound card." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I don't have anything like that, but I actually know of a guy who makes them." I'm like, "Really? That's interesting." And so he hooked me up with this guy who was designing sound cards with his brother in his basement. I didn't know it was his basement at the time, but it was like he had his company, and his name was Paul, and they were doing a startup. He and his brother were doing a startup, and they were working on a pretty groundbreaking chip that would blow away AdLib and Sound Blaster. And it was a technology called wavetable synthesis, and his audio card became the Gravis Ultrasound.
Wow, that's quite big.
Yeah, so the Gus was really a breakthrough card. And I met Paul, and he had quit his job. Like, he and his brother were working at like Kodak and Xerox. They quit their jobs, and they were doing their startup. And I was talking to him on the phone, and he's like, why are you interested in like sound cards? I said, well, I'm like, don't embarrass myself here. And I'm like, well, I want to make a game. And he's like, oh, really? Okay, well, why don't you come over and we can talk about it? So he invited me over to his house. My dad was all super suspect about this whole thing because I'm 15 years old. This strange guy has invited me over to his house, to his basement, where he's got this startup. It's like a little shady. But I went over there on a Saturday morning, and he was showing me what he was building, and I was like totally blown away by it. And he's like, well, so tell me about this game that you want to make. And actually, so at the time, I didn't actually have an idea. It wasn't Synnergist. It was the idea of making a Doctor Who video game, PC game. And because I was like super into Doctor Who back then, the classic series, and he's like, you should do it. I said, I have no idea. Like I'm like, I don't know how to program. I don't know anything. So he, and I said, I'm just a kid. And he's like, that's not an excuse. So he went over to his bookshelf, and he pulled out a book. I think it was like Turbo C, and an assembly book, and a compiler, disk, and then an animation package called Autodesk Animator. And he put that down on the desk, and he's like, now you got no excuse. Go learn it. Just go figure it out.
Yeah.
And then I'll, and he became my mentor while he was doing his startup, and I learned a lot. So I was working after school, for him, and so it was me and my brother, and then we started getting some friends involved as well. And we were working on like the design, and of course, I didn't know how to program. I was learning. It's not like I knew how to make an game engine, and it's not, the time middleware didn't exist, so you couldn't go and download Unity or Unreal.
I like to think of you guys as like the beginning of the indie auteurs. of let's work
Yeah,
out how to do it ourselves.
we had to do it all ourselves, right? You had to write your engine and all that stuff, and we didn't really know where to begin. And so I was actually piecing things together from those books, from reading video game magazines. I had a subscription to the Sierra magazine, and I'd be like trying to get clues, from what the interviews were with the developers, and like, how did this, what was an engine? Is it some special computer that people had access to that I couldn't do at home? Is this something I could do at home? Anyway, so that's kind of how we started, and so we had this pitch, for this Doctor Who game, and Paul, he said, hey, I know of a publishing company. You can go, pitch to them. I said, really? He said, yeah, why don't you go do that? And so he was driving us to our first meeting because we didn't have driver's licenses at the time. And so we're going into our first meeting, and he's like, what are you gonna call yourselves? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you need a name, for your company. And we were like getting ready to go into this meeting. And I said, how about Vicarious Visions?
Just off the top of your head like that.
Well, so the word vicarious was on my English spelling test the previous week, and I got it wrong. So it just popped into my head. It's like, sounds good.
Yeah.
And that was that. And we walked into our first, meeting, a bunch of scrappy kids wearing my dad's suit and, and tie, and to go, pitch our first game idea. And, we even wrote a letter to the BBC trying to see if we could license Doctor Who, and we never heard back from them. And
well, they were probably working on Day of the Doctor at that point, because they did do a FMV game of Doctor Who.
They did, and it was probably maybe around that time, maybe a few years later. So we never heard back, and that publisher said, it can get complicated with getting a license. Why don't you come up with an original idea? And so we did, and it was like it was around spring break, I think, maybe in 1991, and it was a few of us. It was me, my brother, and a couple of other friends, and it was over spring break. We came up with the story for Synnergist, and it was a pretty crazy week, but we kind of sketched out the overall story for it, and we were putting together that pitch. In fact, so I couldn't find the Bible.
Oh, that's a shame.
But I found a bunch of other stuff, including, I couldn't believe this, I actually found, to my knowledge, the only copy of like the original treatment.
Oh,
I'll tell you what, I'll get these scanned and I'll send them to you.
that would be great.
And but like it's actually I don't even know how much we stuck. I haven't read this actually in 25 years, more than that. And but it's pretty I'm sure this was expanded on from the original writing from 1991, because the copyright says 91, 92. So it's probably got expanded upon. But there's like appendix with like even like the maglev chamber and the restaurant, and like at the end all the different locations, like some background history on like some of these locations, like Noxie Tech and the morgue and all this kind of stuff.
I mean, technically that is part of a design Bible, so you've got part of it.
There you go. So I found this, Anyway, getting back to the story. So we were working on it, and we loved the story, and the other game that so in 1990, fall of 1990, the game that really got me, like after Mean Street, was Countdown.
Mm.
Also from Access,
Yeah.
and I was so engrossed in that game, and that was so underrated. It didn't do as well as Mean Streets, by far. And then Martian came out fall of 91. I think I'm getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
Fall of 91. And I'm like, this is it. And I've got to, we were struggling trying to figure out how to write a game engine. And but we were working on some other demos, and and I was learning everything. It was like learning how to do the animation, and we borrowed like a video camera from like the high school, and I bought an early digitizer card that you could plug in like the RGB cables, and digitized frames, but it was like very low frame rate. I set up a RAM disk to try and capture faster, off of a SVHS camera, and eventually we ended up building a blue screen set down in my parents' basement.
Oh, nice.
And
They must have loved that.
that's where we shot everything, and met with these musicians who became friends with, and David Vincent and Tom Plintz, and they were writing the music. So we would work on some like cinematics. There was a lot of tests that we did because we just didn't know how these things were done. And to be honest with you, it was like still early days, right? It was still like very early CD-ROM. I mean, even even around that time, everybody was trying to figure it out.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about games from that era is because there's no guide, so everyone's got their own idea. Whereas, like, you see a lot of games now where it's kind of like, this is how you do this and this is how you do that. So then, of course, I'm going to
Yeah.
do this. And maybe I'll put in a couple of other things, but it's mostly the same. Like, design structure.
Yeah, I mean, it was like we filmed on location. Man, so in high school, one of the ways I kind of got out of some of my classes was I signed myself out on a fake internship,
Oh, dear.
and
You didn't get caught for that, did you?
these are like my internship forms that I still have in this folder. It's crazy, but like it has. It's wild. I didn't even remember like some of the stuff on. Let me see if I can find it. Like I have stuff here like working like on a Friday, had classes, and then we filmed like the restaurant scene. Like when we were originally doing that, we actually filmed it at a restaurant.
Oh.
And because we were trying to do like on location, and we were doing on location tests, didn't go so well because we didn't have good control over the lighting. And there's like notes in here of like filming at 1:00 in the morning, like this Chinese restaurant that a friend of mine, his family owned. And so after they closed up at 11 p.m., we shot until like 3:30 in the morning. And then I'd go to school the next day. I'm like, how the hell did my parents let me get away with this?
That is very, I suppose, like, because you had funding at that point, didn't you? So.
No, it wasn't.
No,
This was
wow.
pre-funded. Yeah. This was all pre-funding. So like we didn't have our demo. So this was like we didn't get any funding until 1994. And so this is all trying to make a demo. And so what happened was the early stuff we were just doing as animation tests and figuring out how to do synchronized video and audio, because that was also something to figure out. And so we were doing those doing those demos, but it became pretty clear we had to get a game engine. So I'm like, all right, I'm totally like obsessing over like Martian Memorandum. I'm just going to call up Access Software and see if I can license their game engine.
I mean,
So
obviously
that
that worked out because it was you guys did it, and I think Notropolis, the people who made Notropolis, did as well.
so here's the real story, a little nugget. So I called up Access, and I saw in the credits that the programming for Martian was done by Brent Erickson, and I asked to speak to Brent. And Brent had left the company, and so this was after Martian, but before Amazon came out. Brent had left the company, and so I convinced the person on the phone to give me Brent's phone number, and I called up Brent at home, and Brent's like, yeah, give me a call like at my office in the morning. I'm like, I'm just like winging this, and I called up Brent and at his office, and he's like, yeah, I'm not at Access anymore, and I've got my own company, Flashpoint Productions, and we're working on some new stuff, and he and his partner Sean Mitchell. Sean did the cover art to like Amazon and Martian, and he was the art director at Flashpoint, and they were doing that. Well, as it turns out, Brent owned the engine that he wrote, because I think he was actually a contractor to Access for all those years. So like I think if my memory serves me, I could be wrong, Imagination Unlimited was his company, and he and you'll see that in the credits for Mean Streets, I think. And but anyway, he owned that engine, and Access had a license to it, for Martian and Amazon, and of course they went on to build their own engine for Under Killing Moon, which was all 3D. But I asked him if he would be interested in licensing his engine to me, and I sent him the script and stuff, and this is what we were doing, and he said, yeah, I think we might be able to work something out, and so that was pretty awesome. That was like late '92, maybe early '93, and we had to then build a demo. And so he was moving on to Notropolis, and Notropolis was sort of the next version of that engine. So we didn't have that version of the engine. We kind of forked because that was still in development.
Yeah, well, that makes sense because when we were breaking down Synnergist, we found there's actually a list of Martian Memorandum locations hidden in the game files.
Yeah. So we it was all written in assembly, and so it kind of forked. So there was some similarities, and but then we ended up making changes to the engine ourselves, and then the video player and some of the video tech that was in Metropolis made it back into the Synnergist code, and that's what the video format is based on. And anyway, so there's some variations. So this is Brent is so cool. So he agreed to fly out to visit us, to kind of give us the engine and kind of spend a day with us and take us through some of the tools and how the layout of the engine worked, and so scrounged up enough money. Now we didn't have the publishing deal. This was 1992. Yeah. So we scrounged up enough money, and I was working other jobs and stuff, and my brother and I worked for tips checking coats at a local art gallery. That's how we funded VV, in the early days. And we were working with some freelance artists who were way too, expensive, even doing concept art. So one of the freelance artists taught him how to do perspective architectural drawings and stuff. And my brother did all of the background art, visualization, and all the pencil drawings and stuff. And and everything. And then we eventually worked with some freelance painters, including Sandy Gifford, who she became our lead artist, painting a lot of the scenes, in the game. And so we were just scrounging up money to try and do this and do the initial demo, because for us to get a publishing deal, we had to have a pretty solid, compelling demo. And so now I'm thinking it's around May of 1993, and Brent flies out to visit us, gets off the plane, and he's like, I'm sure he's thinking, oh my God, it's a bunch of kids. And but he was a good sport about it, and came down into our basement, and he was like teaching this stuff, and I said, hey, I don't really have that much money to pay you up front for the license. Can we figure this out where I can pay you once we get a publishing deal, and he's like, look, I started when I was a kid, and he would go to local community college, and his first games were on the Commodore 64, and he developed a game called Beachhead, which was a very groundbreaking game on the Commodore 64, and he did a lot of stuff, including he worked on Lynx, and before that, World Class Leaderboard, and like golf games and stuff, and he did a bunch of stuff, but he was telling me how his dad would drive him around to Radio Shacks, and he would sell his games at Radio Shacks in like Ziploc bags. This was like in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and that kind of thing. And he started out young, and he didn't have access to a computer. He'd go to the community college and use the computer there, and that's how he learned. And so I think he must have been in his late 20s at the time when he was starting up Flashpoint. So he was still pretty young, and he's like, yeah, I'll do it. And he met Paul Travers, and they had launched the Gravis ultrasound, and that was also one of my jobs. And I started going to trade shows for Forte, and they basically paid my way, and I would go try and meet publishers and developers, and I was doing dev support on the side for the Gravis ultrasound. And then what became they started going to VR in the early 90s, and they did a headset called the VFX1, the Forte VFX1. It's one of the first consumer VR headsets. And I started doing support for that. I'm working with developers like Looking Glass on System Shock, and putting in support for Quake 1, and just meeting developers that way. Anyway, we got our first publishing deal in 1994 after we had that demo, but it took a lot longer than we thought to get the game done. So if it had come out in 94, that when we originally thought, I think it would have sold better.
Yeah, I think doing a DOS game after 95 comes out is a bit of a ask. Yeah.
Yeah, it was tough, and we're working on compatibility, and we had all kinds of challenges with it.
And you had school, like you were all going to university as well.
Yeah. We were, I was putting 60 hours a week into VV, and studying computer science and psychology, and it was tough. But we after we got the publishing deal, we spent 2 years before it was published, and and that was really challenging, because then we had to really ship the game, and get it done, and the game got bigger. I mean, originally it was supposed to be a floppy disk game, that became the big CD-ROM game, and and we learned how to do art and animation and programming and all of that stuff. So anyway, it was 5 years of my life, from the kernel of an idea, and that was pretty special.
Well, I think it's as someone who does enjoy like these older obscure games, out of a lot of the ones that I've played that are, of that era, it has a lot more, like, depth into it than a lot of the other games do. It's kind of, a lot of them are like, oh, this is our plot line and don't really worry about this. But like, if you actually like dig into like the Synnergist lore, it is actually all there. So you've done a brilliant job, all of you. So
Thanks. It was, the acting was hit and miss, missed most of it,
it
but
it's part of its charm though. Like,
it is.
especially of that era, to have somewhat hammy acting, and then have what your lead go on to become a weatherman as well, just adds to the topping of the cake.
Well, Jeff was one of my classmates. I met
Mm.
him on the school bus, and and he yeah he's built a nice career, and Aaron
Became a rabbi.
he's a rabbi. That's right. He went on to do that. Yeah, it's pretty cool, with that era. And David Vincent, he went on, to a broader career. Sadly, Tom passed away,
Oh yeah.
cancer few years ago, which was a real shocker. Um, but but yeah, it was, the interesting thing about like sort of the early mid 90s was there was so much innovation going on, but sharing was pretty limited, like
Mm.
sharing of knowledge within the industry. If you could afford to go to the computer game developers conference at the time, um,
I mean, it's still quite an expensive ask itself right now.
it is. It is. And it was a time when there was, so much change, that was happening. And, and the early CD-ROM, that was what was captivating. It's like, this is the future. This is like the future of entertainment and storytelling, all of those things. And the way it sort of pulled you in. And especially when we wrote the script for Synnergist in 92. I mean, again, this is before any of the CD-ROM games really came out. I mean, you had what Sierra was doing with like King's Quest V and Space Quest 4 and all that, but it was basically the floppy disk game with
Audio on top.
voiceover.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But then you've got
And
like, like Seventh Guest on the other hand, where they've gone full.
yeah,
Actually, that was my first PC game. I played that when I was 7. So,
that's awesome. It's yeah, so it was everybody was trying to figure it out.
hmm.
And we were, we were behind the curve, but like, we were trying to also be a real company, and make our first game. And it was just super ambitious in terms of, what we were trying to go after. And, you know, we had some luck along the way. I mean, obviously lots of pitfalls, but like some luck along the way, with Brent. I'm forever grateful, to Brent. And actually, a little bit of trivia. Years later, Brent came to work for me at Vicarious, and years later, because he left the games industry, and then and then wanted to come back in, and we worked together for a few years, and that was amazing. So we're like lifelong friends. And another important person, and again in the whole adventure game kind of era, was Matt Grusin from Microprose. They had a few adventure games that they made, Rex Nebula and
Mm.
the Cosmic Genderbender and Return of the Phantom.
Oh, I love
And
Return of the Phantom.
Return of the Phantom was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, like the color gels that they make you go and get, it's kind of like that didn't actually mean anything. You had to find them. Like you were spending like the advanced one was you had to find even more, and like they still do nothing.
Yes. And actually, so I met Matt when they were finishing up Return of the Phantom, and I couldn't beat it because of that maze at the
Oh
end
yeah.
and the catacombs, and he faxed me the map. The original design. I still have it. I still have that fax,
Hmm.
and
Well, I mean, like
and
not quite the same thing, but the ending of Laura Bow, the chase scene through the
oh
museum,
yeah,
like because I was only about 8 at the time, And so I couldn't get through it. My dad took me to his family friend because this is when no one had internet in Australia, but his friend did. So we went over there and we printed out just that part of the
Oh,
walkthrough, and I still have that printout. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it was a special time. So you had, Matt was also became, one of my, mentors. And hey, little known trivia fact. So like, we called Vicarious Visions, and it was a mouthful. But when I was ringing up different publishers, one of the publishers I rang up early days was Microprose, and this is before they started making Adventure. Maybe no, it was they were actually in development with Rex Nebular, but like it was not publicly known at the
mm.
time. And so I called up Microprose, and the only name that I like knew of Microprose was Sid Meier. And so I said, "Can I speak to Sid Meier?" And they transferred me to him. And so I started talking to Sid Meier, and I'm like, the independent developer, we got a pitch for a game, for an adventure game. And I said, company's called Vicarious Visions, and he's like, VV, huh? And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty good. I'm going to use that. And so VV became the
Unofficial name,
shorthand for
yeah.
it, and everybody at VV still calls it VV today. And but it was Sid Meier who first coined that.
Wow.
And yeah, he wouldn't remember any of this,
No.
like because it was just a rando call. But he then said, I need to transfer you over to Matt Gruson because there's actually an adventure game group inside Microprose. I'm like, really?
Mm.
And so I got transferred to Matt, and Matt was also one of those mentors where I'm just a scrappy kid, and and he kind of maybe took pity on me. I don't know. He was there. It was cool. It was they did that, and then afterwards, after that group got shut down, he ended up going to Sanctuary Woods, and they made Riddle of Master Lu
Mm-hmm.
using the next generation version of that engine. So again, sadly, Matt passed away last year,
Mm.
which was like a total shock. Uh, but anyway, it's been a long history. Not many people ask me about Synnergist because like most of the story of VV and what VV really became known for came well after that.
Yeah. Well, that's often the case, but there's always an inciting incident. It's part of your hero's journey. There.
Yes, it's been a journey, that's for sure.
Mm.
So what other I'm rambling at this
Yeah. Well,
point, but
what's it called? It's covered quite a few of them. Because it had only a European release. Did you ever ask if there was going to
uh,
be a USA release?
so here's the other interesting bit about 21st Century Entertainment. The way I got introduced to him was they actually had a U.S. office in Rochester, New York, and so uh, that's how I first met them, and then got introduction to the parent office in the UK. And so it was going to be published in the U.S., and that was full intention of doing that. And they were primarily known for publishing these pinball games, Pinball Fantasies and Pinball Illusions, which was done by a really small team in Sweden called Digital Illusions that
Mm.
became Dice,
Yeah.
and went on to do bigger things. And so the plan was to publish in the U.S. In fact, there were ads in magazines in the U.S. For Synnergist, but they ended up shutting down the U.S. publishing operation. They
Hmm.
were winding it down, and it was just bad luck.
Yeah.
If we'd finished the game sooner, it would have had a U.S. release,
And it might have
but
been
it
a
never
little bit
really
more widely known.
exactly. exactly. So it really only got the European release and then a German version as well.
I suppose then like, we spoke about some of the other members like Aaron. What about Joe? Because like I think Joe still does programming.
Yeah, I've lost touch with Joe and Evan.
Hmm.
At one point or other, because we all went to different colleges,
Yeah,
and uh,
that must have been
and
hard for just like working on the game together.
it was really challenging because we got to a pretty good spot by the end of high school, and then we were in college, and it became freshman year. We made it work. We all had emails for the first time,
Hmm.
and we were able to, share some of that. But the uh, it became like, after the script and stuff was done, and it was mostly like sort of programming and art, and animation. It kind of fell back on, me and my brother,
Hmm.
and Evan was contributing to the writing, and Joe was doing some, some programming on the scripts. But they kind of had sort of other interests and other commitments and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
and so they became less and less involved. In the last year and a half of the project,
Yeah.
and then most of the work was it basically came down to my brother, myself, Aaron, and Sandy Gifford, really.
Hmm.
I think to finish the project because a lot of the other pieces were done, and the programming side, took the longest,
Yeah.
and finalizing a lot of that stuff. And so
And then putting
I
in the
ended up,
final path as well, the secret path.
yeah, that was all Aaron's idea
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah, like it's
and
like he's a mad genius, which is the point that I'm like, because like we were breaking it step by step because a lot of people had found the hooded stranger from Down from Jessica, but they were like, I
yeah,
don't know what to give him. There's nothing I can give him. I saw one person finally talk about the broken watch, but they had
broken
no
watch.
idea how they got it. And like, so I was just like, well, look, can we talk about what you actually did? And then I finally realized that I went, oh, there's a pinball machine in the Last Chance bar. It only works in one instance, and it has like the you've seen the path. It's a bit insane, but like by the time that we're breaking it down, and I got to that final room, and I went, wait, why is the door locked? And then working way back through, and be like, this man is a mad genius.
He is a genius. He is absolutely a mad genius. And yeah, that was all him. And he's like, hey, I'm gonna do this crazy thing. And I'm like, all right, let's write the script. In fact, so he was the hooded stranger.
Ah, I
And
was wondering who Raymond Luxury Yacht was.
yeah, an old Monty Python
Yeah.
joke. Um, and but that was Aaron. Haha, finally revealed after all this time. But it was Aaron, and it was basically the whole thing was done because nobody knew. Like the whole thing was recorded, and any additional art and animation, the whole thing was just done by me and him.
Hmm.
And in fact, I just could not even keep it straight in my head in terms of like the code,
Hmm.
because he was like, I'm like, all right, Aaron, you go do it. I'll get all the content prepared, for it, and we'll put it all together. And it was, it was, we were working on the last of the bugs, and I ended up taking some time off from college, like about 9 months to finish the game,
Hmm.
and so I was working on it, full time, and Aaron was doing it after hours, and we just kept at it until we had to ship this thing, come hell or high water. So I remember it was very anticlimactic when we were done. I thought it was going to be the glory, and
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be like
The money's gonna
an
start
amazing
rolling in,
time.
and you know.
Yeah, we're going to be rich and famous. And it's like, nope, left with a lot of debt, and but we had a published game, and um, it was pretty anticlimactic in that sense, but we were freaking really, really proud of it. And, um, and then we had to decide whether we were going to keep going or not.
I did particularly like with in that secret path with the hooded stranger that if you don't give him the broken watch, even if you like got to the end with the next part, they'd be like, no, sorry, I don't have a time machine to go back. I'm taking that item from you. Be like,
Yes, that he was punishing,
yeah.
with the.
Oh yeah, the actual like the picture frame that you have to click on. If you click on it too many times, it's just gone. You can't get it anymore.
Yes, I remember that. It's like, why are you doing this? And he's like, we're gonna make this thing really hard. I'm like, I don't know if anybody's gonna figure it out. It's like somebody will figure it out, and we put that contest like nobody's gonna find out, and it's like I think in one interview, I mentioned that there was
The prize.
the prize and the Easter egg and stuff. I said I'm gonna have to mention it because like nobody's like finding any of the clues. We haven't heard anything about it, and so we mentioned it, and time went on, and I had no. I mean, come on, not even my wildest dreams would I think that anybody would ever find it.
Mm.
It's so it just blows my mind.